How many of you are managing an innovation program using IdeaScale? Okay, great. That's what I planned around that. So I hit that one. All right. I got to put this on?
Yeah, you can
Record everything I say? All right.
fasten it.
And then the other thing is, how many are in government? Okay, great. Yeah, great, because a lot of my comments today will be government focused. I have been, as Tim mentioned, a client of IdeaScale. I've been a user. I've been to Open Nation, the original, the OG Open Nation in Silicon Valley. I would say that this event, brings the same ethos. I always love the informality of it and the true community, the knowledge exchange that happens. I would say the one major difference is there's probably more ties at the DC event. So I did that just to keep it government, I guess. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the presentation. Just really quickly, why you should possibly listen to me. From my perspective, I've been supporting a better government, for most of my career. Over 12 plus years in some contract-related type of work, and that's by choice. I think there's a lot of impact that can be made in the government for those who are courageous enough. So I've started a company, Ensemble. We're located here in DC. We're a small consulting firm. We were started last year. Prior to that, I ran an innovation business unit for a larger government contractor here in DC. The other big wins, I was a AAAS fellow. The American Association for the Advancement of Science brought me here. It took me out of my engineering profession at the Jet Propulsion Lab at NASA and brought me here to learn more about public policy. But I also had some international experience as well with the State Department as a Fulbright Scholar. So, if you can just go quickly to the next slide, just really quickly what we do and why it's related to what I'm going to talk about today. Our services are segmented in three buckets, really. They span marketing, consulting services, and technology. We like to call ourselves a consultancy because we're part agency, part consulting firm. But you can read the bullets, but what we're going to focus on today is this prize design and challenge management segment, and that's often procured under the NAICS codes for marketing. That's often how people actually procure IdeaScale's platform as well, also under technology. And then in terms of consulting, we're really going to focus on process development and program evaluation. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was in government, program evaluation was always like the last thing you thought about. Hopefully by the end of today's conversation, maybe it's what you think about in the beginning, but from a different perspective, from the Silicon Valley perspective. So let's go ahead and, so with that, I got to give some homage to Lean Startup, great shout out, Steve Blank, Eric Ries. Actually, Steve Blank was an investor in one of Eric Ries' first companies, IMView. I don't know if anybody was down with IMView back in what was it, like the 2000s? It was. Oh yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like, anyway, long story. You can look it up. But Lean Startup was, instrumental in that it codified this idea of innovation accounting. This idea, so Steve Blank was like, find a repeatable process. Well, how do you do that? We have to run experiments, and you have to measure the efficacy of those experiments. So Eric Ries provided the lexicon, called innovation accounting. You want to measure your progress, and you want to do things rapidly, and you want to learn. So you want to build, you want to measure the efficacy of your product or your program, and then you want to learn from that and then implement those changes in the subsequent version. So Eric also talked about, well, what are the measurements you should be looking at? And there's some debate about that. So he talked about this Vanity Metrics and Actionable Metrics. So if you want to go to the next slide, you may be asking yourself, what the heck is a Vanity Metric? Well, Vanity Metrics are good for making you feel awesome, for wanting to do an orange mocha frappuccino fight. But they really don't tell you much about how your program is doing with respect to impact or objectives. So some concrete examples of that are things like impressions, right? Impressions lets you know people are looking at your site or your community, but it doesn't really tell you how effective those impressions are at driving idea generation or impact for your program. And then another thing that is particularly relevant to government loves to do press releases, and I've done them, on funds awarded. and that's primarily congressionally driven. You got to show you're spending the money. But is that really what we should be looking at? Should that be our entire goal? And that's more of a, paradigm shift question, right? Because, that's a real reality. You have to spend the money or else your program's not gonna live. But is that all you should be looking at? Okay, so then begs the question, then if we know vanity metrics are to be avoided, what are actionable metrics? And this is my definition for public sector. So Eric Ries has a definition for startups, rapidly small scaling organizations. But for public sector, I define it as actionable metrics are leading indicators, right? So they're predictive. They let you know about the future. Leading indicators of achieving the aligned objectives of your innovation program. Now that alignment is key because in complex organizations, it's not just what you care about. It's not even necessarily what the person who signs the funding cares about. There is a multitude of stakeholders. So there's people who have direct authority over your program, and there's people who have indirect influence to kill your program. And you somehow have to, Katia knows what I'm talking about, and you somehow have to align all those objectives together and identify the leading indicators that are going to predict those. And that will ensure program success and continuity of your innovation program because we don't want to be a one-off to have real impact. All right. And let me know how I'm doing on time. I don't really know we're scheduled or whatnot. But so how do you create these metrics, right? So we've made a definition. This is kind of, what I've learned over running some of these programs, both with IdeaScale and for other government customers. The first thing you want to do is define the objectives. And it sounds, rudimentary, but oftentimes those objectives are not well thought out at the beginning of launching a program, especially if it's top down. It's like we want to run a challenge. Bang, here it is on your desk, go, right? So you got to think about, what do I want to get out of this, right? In my opinion, less is more. If you have one or two good ones, it's a lot better to show results for that. If you try to make the whole world happy, or if you go too big with a small budget, you may not get to run that program again. All right, and then the alignment, as I spoke previously, there are multiple stakeholders. You have to identify those who have direct authority and those who have indirect authority, and that can be challenging. Bring them to the table and make sure everybody buys in. So what we like to do too is on a kickoff, tactically, on a kickoff, when you're getting ready to start this, engagement with IdeaScale, IdeaScale will bring everybody to the table and say go around and be like, what's a win for you? And get everybody to vocally say that, what the win is for each person. And you'll see people from public affairs, completely different objectives than people from the technology side. The program side is completely, contracting officers, got a whole other set of requirements. But it's important to have that discussion because at the end of the day, when you're managing that program, you got to make each one of those persons, people, you have to justify why you did or did not achieve what they're looking for continuity of the program. All right, select the metrics which are correlated or which are leading indicators of those particular program objectives and create your plan. So create your plan because that will actually make you go, so, oftentimes in government, planning, at the end of the day, the plan was pretty much irrelevant. You just deviate. But the act of planning is really important for consensus building and for making sure you have the, testing feasibility. Can I actually even measure this data? Oftentimes we come up with beautiful metrics which you can't actually get the data on. IdeaScale's done a great job of integrating metrics into their dashboard. They have a lot of new features that allow you to kind of pull out more information from your campaigns. So you want to make sure you can acquire the data and then finally execute and report your progress. And the key thing is when comes time to make decisions, to iterate on your program design, try to only use the actionable metrics. If you have to report funds given, fine, track it. Right? But use the actionable metrics to help you define how you adjust your program design. All right, so that's kind of high level, but let's take a look at the field. What are some good examples? Well, I took our collaboration together, IdeaScale, and when I was back at the Department of Energy, we ran a grand challenge called the Sunshot Catalyst, and it was solar's moonshot moment, as we refer to it. For those unfamiliar with the moonshot, President Kennedy, 60s, made a speech at Rice University. We're going to the moon because it's difficult. That's purely why we're doing it, and we're in a race. What was helpful about that, and what was actually, landmark, is that he defined a timeline and a clear goal. By the end of the decade, put people on the moon. That's tough to do in government. So solar tried to do that. So what they said is, if you go to the next slide, if you want to go, well, let's stay here. Basically what they said is, we want to drive down the cost of solar energy so that it's competitive with fossil fuel. So that in itself is a metric. So we want to have price parity. And they looked at two metrics. If you're interested, it's $1 per watt or 6 cents per kilowatt hour by 2020. So that was a kind of a matrix level, directorate level goal. Now, if you just skip 2 slides real quick, because I put them out of order. Yeah, that one right back to this one, yeah. So this is what guided our program design on the technical front. Basically the fact that the majority of the cost of a solar system, so if you're trying to drive down costs, you want to look at the biggest levers. So the majority of the system was in the soft costs or non-hardware costs. So I could give you panels and you're still going to spend 64 cents on the dollar just to hook them up to the grid. So as in other industries, there was a thesis that like software, tech, automation could facilitate that transition process and drive down that cost. So that was like our kind of guiding kind of insight. And there's a lot of data on the soft costs, where that comes from. Now, fast forward, DOE is actually, and CETO, Solar Energy Technologies Office, has hit these goals. 2020, before 2020, they've actually achieved price parity for solar systems at the utility scale. So they were successful in doing that, and we can come back to it later as to, was it a good goal to set this? I don't know, right? All right, so let's go to the program design.
Mike, do you want questions at the end, or?
Yeah, no, feel free to break in, ask questions. I got a lot of stuff here, and I'm realizing going through it really quickly, but feel free to ask questions.
Not to lead the witness, but one thing I thought was interesting is that didn't you actually crowdsource what problems were?
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, so I was going to say this was the framework which we used, which was a little bit different, because we said we're a technology office and we're reaching out to a new community now of like software developers, tech startups, people who integrated enterprise IT, because enterprise IT is critical for the grid and for utilities. So it was a new community for us. So we're like, you know what? We may not have all the right answers, so why don't we crowdsource the problem statements, which are the biggest pain points in the industry. So that's what we did in our problemation, but we called it ideation. And we gave prizes for that on the back end. And then what we had was business innovation coupled to the problem. So you had to go into Idea Scale platform and you had to respond to a specific problem with your business solution, and it was through a video pitch. And then we evaluated those video pitches on a variety of evaluation criteria and awarded a small amount of them. And it was critical in the incentive design that first award was small, because the applicant wasn't required to do a lot to enter the program, but we didn't want to provide a large investment without de-risking the solution. So we provided a $25,000 credit. So it was a voucher basically to work with a software development platform to build out their solution. So show us what you're going to build with a small amount of capital, and then demo it for us. So 20 people received these vouchers. They worked with another crowdsourced community called Topcoder. They built products. We had a demo day. There were 17 products built in the first round. And based on a pitch, 5 were awarded actual cash. And they're awarded cash in 2 tranches. The first one was $30,000 on the spot, and that started a 6-month clock where they had to hit growth metrics. So they had to go to market. So they had to deploy technology. So it went from an initial pain point to a product in market. So the way we awarded the 5 ideas or 5 problems of most significance was on the back end. People who had addressed that problem with a business pitch, built a product, and won the cash, we looked at the problem that originally seeded that innovation cycle and gave them $1,000. You may ask yourself, like, okay, well, did the people with the solution just submit their own problem? So 3 out of the 5 people answered their own problem, but 2 problems were submitted by people who had no interest in executing a solution. Another fascinating fact, of those 5 winning problems, only one of them was actually signaled as important by the Department of Energy, Solar Energy Technologies office. So it shows you that, like, you know, crowdsourcing can be valuable at getting past the layers of bureaucracy and getting right to the consumer pain points. So those are kind of the insights on program design, but let's switch to metrics here, because we're talking about how to design good, actionable metrics. And if you go to the next slide after this one, this is what we thought would be powerful. We thought, well, return on investment, that's what we should look at, right? If we're trying to drive down costs, we want to do that as effectively as possible for the taxpayer. So let's look at some, you know, ROI metrics, you know, are something per dollar, you know, anything per dollar, right? So we were like, all right, what was the speed at which we were taking stuff to market? And let's compare it against SBIR Phase 2 awards. Turns out it's twice as fast. Compared against SBIR Phase 2 awards, we were giving $100,000. Those are $1 million. It's 10 times as cost effective. And the critical impact metric was that because it was a prize and because it was conditional that you had to be in market at the time of award, it was 100% of the prize winners were commercialized. So that's the highest rate of commercialization of any government grant program across the board. And it's just inherent in the program design. So it turned out that was 17 times more effective than a comparable SBIR grant. So we thought, oh, that's a slam dunk, right? Well, there's a little devil in the details in that it took a lot of personnel to manage this program. And if you're looking at personnel headcount at a department level, you know, is that the best use of your people to put 3 people on a program, a small dollar amount, when you still have to get funds out the door? So that was an oversight on our part. You know, we missed that. And that'll come in at the lessons learned at the end. Okay, so next slide. So ROI metrics, a good example, right? The other thing is a conversion funnel on your outreach, right? It's always important to look at the entire process by which a person receives an impression from your program or challenge and then eventually does some action which you desire. So we track that all the way from impressions to eventually the creation of startups. So through people on Twitter, through you know, membership in the community, 23,000, and then we also measured active members because, you know, total community members can be a little bit of a vanity metric in that, you know, it just really shows you how big your email list is in your department. You just spam everybody and invite them to the community, and since you've been giving them money for 10 some odd years, of course they're going to sign up. So we wanted to look at active people. So people were commenting, submitting ideas, or had agreed to accept the weekly communications we had with them. You know, we also looked at the total number of problem statements of those which were converted to prototypes and demo day winners, and you know, you can track conversion rates on each one of these. At the end of the day, you can divide, you know, each one of these levels by the cost it took to achieve each one of those results and get your ROI metrics on that as well. So that's just one example of a conversion funnel which can tell you how well your outreach is doing and how efficient it is. You can also segment that by locality to determine which locations are responding the most to your program. Maybe you can discover some insights there. So in this case, you know, over 50,000 were reached in the Bay Area. You know, we did a special engagement in the Bay Area because it had a propensity to really deliver a lot of good solutions and value. So we had 2 like sidecar events. You know, we had a road show, TechCrunch Disrupt, another one is FunCube, which is now Powerhouse. It's a solar accelerator. And that's kind of the, you know, the stats there, keeping in mind, you know, the conversion rate at each level. So basically for a roadshow engagement in the Bay Area, we were able to get, you know, 40 new verified members, you know, from the total number of tickets registered at some of our events. So, you know, a third of people coming to the events were becoming active members, and then roughly, you know, 10% of these people ended up, you know, pitching videos. So, you know, if you're looking at dollars per pitch, you know, that shows you how effective you're doing there as well. All right, so that's by location. You know, qualitative. I don't want to, you know, ignore the qualitative learnings, right? These are huge because sometimes that can direct you toward a more quantitative measurement. And this is just kind of we put together like the, you know, the 10 commandments of road shows. And these are just some insights that we discovered going across the country kind of advertising this prize accelerator. you know, I think what we discovered is that it's possible to bring adjacent communities of innovators and pivot them toward the problems of your particular directorate or group. So we did that with we did that with software innovators. We then showed them solar problems and they became interested, but it took engagement. So that theory was validated. You know, anchor events were critical in kind of maximizing the efficacy of all this like local outreach. You know, I think, are we going to give these slides out? Or, yeah, I mean, you can go through each one of these. You know, there's some insight in each one of them. I think there's some really tactical stuff. You know, stay in the same hotel, be ready to improvise. At one point, we had to barbecue food. We did a barbecue at an accelerator event because we were running low on budget, so we were flipping hamburgers. And then, you know, we always got to watch out for the unexpected, the photo bombers, right? So, you know, make sure you screen everything before you show the results back at home base. Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
5.
Yes. I don't even know 5. Yes.
So we're in DC. Obviously, most national headquarters area reside here, but if we're trying to drive innovation from the federal side, and we need 5 to engage local community partners,
Yeah.
what are some of the lessons learned and best practices that you think?
So here in
Just before
DC
you move on
or
with
any locale or?
with regards to metrics and what you learned.
Yeah, so well, with here, so we were able to do this from DC. We went to each one of these regions. So there's an identification stage where we identify localities with a variety of, well, in our case, we were looking for, you know, key networks. So we were looking for, you know, nerds and rich people, really. So people, investors, and we were looking for like people with a tech background. So that puts you in a couple places. You know, it puts you in Boston, San Francisco, and if you're Steve Case, it puts you in Ohio with Rise of the Rest. But basically, there's an identification phase, and then, you know, leveraging like channel partnerships. You know, oftentimes you're already funding, you know, kind of best practices, community building. You know, leveraging those channels that you already have, and then leveraging that space, you know, to then do like these kind of splashdown events, you know, makes things easier. So leveraging your existing connections and identifying new ones.
Thank you.
So I also put in there too, that we did sponsor some conferences. So we had some content. We created like, we called it a jamathon. So it was specific, like rapid ideation, like content. It was a 2-hour event. So when we would splash down into some of these different localities, we would run this like fast-paced, you know, competitive pitch event. And, you know, we got a lot of results out of that and a lot of engagement from people. Because people like structure. When you get them there, you know, that if you give them like a structured event and, you know, you get them all amped up on coffee, whatever, you know, beer, pizza, you know, people get excited about it and they'll be more, you know, participatory.
I'm sorry, did you say how many locations did you do?
So for Catalyst, I think we did 4.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we went like Boston. We did events. Actually, we worked bread. Was it the bread? Did we work bread? Wonder Bread. Yeah, we went to Wonder Bread. We did 1776. So we highlighted, you know, accelerators. We did one in Boston, a couple in Boston, and we did one in San Francisco. So other things, you know, depending on where you're at in the government, you know, PR recognition is big. Also recognition by the White House, so we tracked all that. PR mentions, you know, especially national media outlets. Another one is awards. Idea Scale gave us an award. And, you know, South by Southwest Eco, you know, big branded venues. Actually, we were the first government entity to go to TechCrunch. So I'm gonna put that out there. DOE was the first one to go, and then everybody's already on TechCrunch. This was in like 2014. All right, so then next slide. So thought leadership, it's another way to, especially if you're in the technical side, you know, papers, IP, publications, talks, you know, a lot of times, you know, that can be effective at pleasing one of those stakeholders. And then finally, case studies. This is probably, you know, more effective for like reporting, you know, and that long-term documentation. That's one thing that we always forget to do. The government, you just want to get to the next program. You don't have time for that. But documentation is key because you're essentially writing the history. And nobody's going to remember what you did unless you document it. You can also leverage partners. IdeaScale did a beautiful case study where I pulled that comic book photo from. They did a case study on this program, as well as Topcoder did a case study on it as well. So that's documented. And then finally,
We were being modest. It was in comic book form. The case study was in comic book form. Yeah.
it was awesome.
Yeah.
Like I showed it to my kids. They were like, "Daddy's a superhero, pushing paper." Yeah. We even had. This is another way to kind of leverage the brand and to leverage the uniqueness of the work that you all are doing. Academic institutions are looking for data. So we were able to get a student of Henry Chesbrough, who founded Open Innovation, to do a master's thesis on it. And we basically we allowed them access to interview all of the applicants, to follow up with them. So that was actually insightful to see. They pulled out the insights from an academic perspective. And they were the ones who told us what's unique about this is you're the only program that links ideation to incubation. That wasn't a popular, people just wanted to do idea challenges, or they wanted to do a technology accelerator, but nobody had kind of linked them together. And we didn't realize that. We were just trying to, operate by that, drive down 64%, do more with less, use a prize. So that was enlightening. And then Bill Eggers with Deloitte wrote a whole book chapter on the program as well. So you can leverage, the private sector. All right, so finally, I want to leave you with the lesson. At the end of the day, Catalyst ran 2 times. And on the 3rd time, it kind of like fizzled out. Now, by then, I had moved on. Some of the original team were working on different things. But, if you look back, you got to ask yourself why. It's a great, successful program. And I don't have all the answers. But I think it kind of falls under this failure, is the failure to recognize the indirect influences over your program. You have to, at the end of the day, if you're having a program with tremendous impact at a low dollar amount, and your primary objective of the person who has authority over your program is to get money out the door, with as limited FTE as possible, then you got to recognize that. So I think it's really important to always, be sensitive to this in complex environments, people or groups with indirect influence over your program. And then the other piece too is that, it's possible that some of the metrics, we looked at everything, right? Some of the metrics we were looking at, weren't necessarily correlated with the aligned objectives of the stakeholders involved, right? So, at the end of the day, it's possible that maybe we're like, okay, we've had success. We engaged so many people, that's all we wanted to do. Maybe we didn't care so much about the ROI piece, so it's important to have those discussions, but remember to, always think about what metrics are correlated with everybody's objectives. So that's it. So
Beautiful.
all right. Yeah. Any
Questions
Any
for
additional
Mike?
questions or
Rick,
thoughts?
question to you guys. Talking about the non-vanity metrics, right? So the number of registrants is nice to know, and it's nice to see the growth there. Do you guys have like a lurker metric, like someone who's engaged but not active? Is there a way that you guys can drill down and say, well, this person logs in every so often, so we're going to call them you know what I mean?
We could do, that's easy to do. We have the data for it, right? So, great idea.
Yeah, I go onto the guitar bulletin board and I read everybody else's stuff. And
You
I
never
learn.
post anything.
I never post anything, right? But I would consider myself a
Lurker.
lurk, an active.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
And there's probably a lot of my guys, our guys, who do that. They go on and just graze on it, but they learn, and it's part of the community.
Yeah, and it still matters to have them.
Yeah, I think
obviously.
they're really.
So I think, with that one, you can look at bounce rates, time on page. So if people are spending an inordinate amount of time on page, but they're not clicking on anything, then you have a community like that. So normally, like, a good bounce rate is something less than 50%. So 50% of the people who are drawn to the page are naturally probably just gonna, whatever, I lost interest. But, if you look at, if people are staying on the page for, 20, 40
Or a
seconds.
few clicks through.
Yeah, no, and if people are engaged, if people are clicking, then that's a huge sign. And actually, Tim told me about the rule of thumb is like 80% are kind of just non-active, possibly lurking, 10% are like willing to just take a newsletter and hear your stuff. And then there's another additional 10 that break out in varying stages of engagement, with like 1% of your community actually like really involved. So.
Yeah, we use it as a benchmark, the 99 and 1 rule. We find it's pretty solid across, where you have mostly indifferent or apathetic users and then power users that are coming in providing all the data. And that actually goes into one of our company missions, which is we want to help you, our customers, engage your most valuable resource, right? Which is passionate people. You want those who are going to be active, who we're calling those power users. But it's still nice to track the other metrics. Okay, so oh yeah, please, Morgan.
My question is about how much you think having a prize money or a challenge motivated people versus just being involved and participating.
So I wish we would have measured this, but you can actually do it with survey questions, Actually, I think in the final report, we did ask that of only the people that won. We didn't get that of the folks who applied but didn't win. But yeah, the incentives, now, if you're talking about just cash, sometimes cash is not particularly incentivizing for everyone. People are motivated by recognition, learning new things, and cash is just one of them. And designing how much cash it would take to motivate a community is also another good exercise. And that's probably best done on the early side through just in-depth interviews. So just pick a couple people who are in your target audience, call them up, and get a feel for what their costs are to develop their technology, and then divide that by 10.
There's a great concept too, I don't know if you've heard it, loser management, basically managing everybody that didn't win. So that's the risk when you have a prize, right? Like especially big monetary prizes, how do the people feel that didn't win, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you have an ongoing community, you want them to come back and participate again. So you want to think about like, well, what am I going to give the people that didn't win, right? Is that gift card or recognition or something like that? Did that come up at all with fun?
Yeah, so I guess
Yeah.
the proper answer to your question is the cash is important, but it's not everything.
Yeah.
So, the community is key, and that's another good argument too, to have like continuous challenges, because there's so much lost energy, once a challenge or an innovation program like just stops. Those folks who lost can always participate, subsequently. They can join the alumni program if you, keep the community alive.
Ooh, I like that.
The alumni, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Any other? Okay, great.
One quick question. So, from the government agency perspective, and knowing that bureaucracy, and knowing that not everyone accepts innovation, and doing things differently,
Yep.
how did you overcome internal
Inertia, the pushback. So yeah, obviously for me it was just really luck. A lot of it is timing, being in the right place. So, but what was it about that environment that maybe you could emulate? So there were a couple things at Sunshot that were going for me and everybody in that department. I mean, one was new leadership. At the time, they had just kind of officially come out with the Sunshot vision. They had, it was the Obama administration. They had put in a new director, Stephen Chu, who wanted to do crazy, bold things. I would say that the White House was really driving pay-for-performance methods, and that was, recognition by the White House was actually a pretty good, driver of motivating our director. That was going to move the program. So alignment with the White House was good. Trying to think of other. I think another thing too is showing early success. That was critical, because and actually, so the director of Sunshot at the time in which the program finished was Min Lee. He's now the general manager for the city of LA, like all their environmental programs. He actually, at an EERE, Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy panel, kind of publicly confessed that he didn't really think this would work. He was like, he was giving us an award, but he's like, it sounds like an intriguing idea. I don't know if it's going to work, but it's a small amount of money. So, start small, and then we showed Min early signs of success. Like immediately, once the program launched, look at all these people in the community, look at all the ideas, so just constantly reporting out on metrics that matter.
Thanks,
Well,
Will.
thank you.
So feel free to engage Mike during the break on metrics for success and more about working on your innovation program. We will share these slides with you afterwards. So how many of you have been to Open Nation California, our big annual conference there? Hands up as attendees or speakers.